So Richard Gage, AIA, is a San Francisco Bay Area architect and member of the American Institute of Architects. He is a founding member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. AE 9/11 Truth now numbers more than 3,000 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all three World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. Welcome, Richard Gage, AIA. Richard, good to have you back.
Nice to be here, Mike. It's pretty awesome. And thanks for covering this very controversial issue. It takes courage.
Before we really get started, Richard, we know that there's some new information regarding Building 7. And I think, at least if we kind of give people an idea of what to expect there, hopefully that will whet their appetite and they will want to hear more. So what has changed, over the last recently in regards to that building specifically?
Well, for those who don't know about Building 7, first of all, here's a 47-story skyscraper, which on the afternoon of 9/11, after witnesses hear explosions, it drops smoothly, symmetrically, straight down in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition at free fall acceleration. And this is extraordinary because, we hear from the official side that normal office fires brought this building down. So normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper before 9/11, ever. So here is the first case. It should be the most studied piece of building failure information in the world. And yet most architects and engineers know nothing about it. The American Institute of Architects, the American Society of Civil Engineers did very little to educate their profession, meaning me. I'm an AIA member as well. And so we've taken it upon ourselves to educate the public. And so one of our efforts in doing that is to hire the University of Alaska, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Hulsey, chairman of the Department of Structural and Environmental Engineering there at University of Alaska in Fairbanks. He is conducting a 3-year, $300,000 study, which I now have in my hands. And we're doing preliminary internal review and crossing our T's and dotting our I's. And that will be published within a month or two out to all the universities. And it'll be peer reviewed. And we're very excited about this because it pulls the rug out from underneath Nist, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain this unprecedented collapse to the American people, but they failed miserably. In fact, this study proves just that, and that this building could not have come down by fire. What they did do is compare their animation video to the actual video of the building's collapse historically, and they showed how a building can come down symmetrically, smoothly, at free fall acceleration by cutting the columns, which is what you do in a controlled demolition.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think that probably laymen like me who don't know very much about the construction of a building or what it's meant to withstand, but historically, as you mentioned, we've seen building demolitions before. But for something that's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was Building 7 burning from the ground floor, or was it somewhere higher up where the fire actually took place?
There was a dozen fires in this building scattered across several floors. They were few, and they were smaller than comparatively by most office fires, and they're not hot fires, so they couldn't possibly have caused the destruction of all 80 columns at once, which is what it takes to keep a building from falling over when it's damaged.
Right, and that obviously one of the things that brings some questions to mind is how do these things just go straight down from top to bottom? in regards to Building 7, again, not being an expert on the topic, but I would think the same thing. If you had an entire floor that was burning at exactly the same temperature all the way across on just that floor, then the whole idea of the pancake effect in my mind kind of makes sense. But as you stated, we had fires going on in different places. So how does it fail structurally like that and just come straight down? Definitely makes you at least question what's really going on there.
Even if you had a fire burning smoothly, across this acre size floor plate, we're talking about floor 12 in this case, which is what the official story blames column 79 as failing as a result of inadequate support after a progressive collapse of 9 floors around it. And then it buckles and causes the interior to collapse from floor 12 up and down from roof to ceiling then. And then in 6 seconds, this then travels laterally across 80 yards of this building. It's 100 yards long, this whole building. So none of that could have happened. It's completely preposterous. But even if you lit a 1,000-degree fire all the way across this floor at once, it wouldn't have caused these beams to fail because the beams are fireproofed with 2-hour fire protection. The columns are fireproofed with 3-hour fire protection. And even Nist acknowledges that there's only enough fire or fuel in any given area of a modern office building to keep a fire going for 20 minutes or 30 minutes in a given place. So it didn't happen.
And that's, I don't really know too much about the history of buildings and fires, but I don't seem to remember any other cases where a building catches fire and then the whole thing just falls to the ground. That's pretty, not very common, is it? I mean, that's not typically how it goes down. Don't they come back later, decide whether the building can be, brought back to safe standards, or just demolish the thing intentionally, correct?
Before 9/11, there was a couple of dozen major fires in high rises. None of them failed in terms of collapsing. And all of them are remodeled, put back into use today.
Okay, now there was, obviously the symmetry and the free fall speed are a couple of the interesting things about this fire. But also there's some mention here about molten metal spheres and nanothermite. What can you tell us about that?
Well, you have the U.S. Geological Survey documenting the dust with their toxicological studies, and also R.J. Lee, a major environmental forensic lab. And they both independently find what amounts to 10 tons of previously molten iron microspheres, about a 1/16 of an inch large on average. Well, actually, that's the largest ones. Most of them are naked to the human eye. But it comprises up to 6% of some of these dust samples. So where does previously molten iron microspheres come from? Iron doesn't melt until you have 2,800 degrees. Well, those temperatures are documented by numerous agencies and private companies and structural engineers and first responders and the iron workers even after the fires were put out. So where does this come from? Well, molten iron is the byproduct of thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. So it's very clear where it comes from. This is not steel we're talking about. It's molten iron. We haven't used iron in skyscrapers for almost 100 years. So this is direct evidence of the use of thermite, as is the pools of molten iron that are found by the first responders, the structural engineers, documented by FEMA in the Appendix C of the Building Performance Assessment Report in May of 2002. They're very careful in this limited metallurgical examination that's done, finding hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel, molten iron invading the steel. The author of this report, Jonathan Barnett, says the ends of the beams were partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures, but they have no explanation for any of this. Well, thermite is the explanation for all of it. And nanothermite is found in its unignited form throughout the World Trade Center. Dust samples by an international team of scientists led by Niels Harrit, Stephen Jones. They find these curious red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. They do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy and finds that it has the ingredients of thermite in these red-gray chips, iron oxide and aluminum powder. They put it in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, and it ignites at about 750 degrees Fahrenheit. What happens when it ignites? It produces what? Molten iron microspheres, the same spheres that are found and documented by the USGS and R.J. Lee. And they have the same chemical properties. So here you see we have an internally consistent, self-corroborating set of repeatable data that can be used in a court of law to bring a lot of people to justice here, the perpetrators of the destruction of these towers.
Okay, and Nate had mentioned on here asking, how hot did NASA say it was 6 weeks after the tower fell? I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, I believe it was September 16th, 1 week afterward. We have documented temperatures from the aerial overflights from NASA. And the USGS published these photos showing temperatures at Building 7 of 1,400 degrees and nearly that at the Twin Towers. And by the way, this is well after the fires were out on Building 7. There's no fire on the surface of these piles. So where did this incredible temperature come from at the surface is what they're measuring here. So it must be much, much, much hotter, twice these temperatures at least, deep down in the pile, and then that in molten iron, for instance, radiating, cooling off to 1,400 degrees or so at the surface of the pile.
And we think that the only way to really explain that then would be the presence of thermite. Is that kind of the idea?
Well, it's certainly an explanation that's supported by all of the evidence. And there might be other explanations. Some have been posited, but none are supported by the evidence.
Okay. And again, I'm definitely not an engineer nor a chemist. I do know one thing about thermite that's kind of interesting, though, is apparently it does not require, if I remember correctly, it doesn't require an external source of oxygen to burn. And I think it produces its own somehow when it's ignited. Does that sound right?
Yeah, see, the thermite's composed of iron oxide, ox meaning oxygen, and aluminum powder. So when the ignition happens, the oxygen goes from the iron oxide to the aluminum powder, producing aluminum oxide ash, which is an off-gassing, which you see rising up out of the molten yellow molten iron, which is yellow in color, pouring out of the South Tower just 10 minutes prior to its collapse, with this aluminum oxide ash rising off the top of it. You also see the aluminum oxide ash trailing in these thick clouds of these at the Twin Towers. After these 4-ton structural steel sections were ejected laterally at 80 miles an hour, landing 600 feet in every direction, trailing these thick white clouds. When you go, well, wait a minute, these steel is not combustible or flammable. And so you're going, what is this material trailing these incredible heavy structural steel units? And by the way, gravity works down, but here we have this incredible outward burst defying gravity. This is high energy explosives we're talking about in this case, that must have that you can see going off 20, 40, even 60 stories down below the collapsing zone, as we're told it was, up above.
Crazy stuff. I want to stop just for a second here. For anyone who has joined us today, we are talking to Richard Gage, AIA. You can check out his website. It's actually right behind him on the wallpaper right there. I want to say it is ae911.org. Is that correct? Or ae11truth.org.
Try again, Mike.
Try it again. Wait, I have to put you on the screen so I can see it. Let me do this. Okay, folks. So rethink911.org. I will get it right on the third try.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. The best one is AE for Architects and Engineers, 911truth.org.
Okay. We will add those to the video description if they are not already in there after the stream is finished. So if this kind of information interests you, and it probably should, feel free to check those out. We are going to have to get through this kind of quick here today. We just so much to talk about. And again, thanks, Richard, for joining us. This is going to make things much easier, I think, for people to understand and obviously have a little more credibility behind these ideas. Because when you're just two random people off the street talking about it, nowadays it's difficult to really know what to believe anymore. There's so much misinformation out there in the world. But if we can bring this over to the Twin Towers specifically, and as far as the official story about the planes, the towers, and the questions surrounding that, obviously the ones that we mentioned already, the towers coming straight down the way that they did. What do you feel is the most compelling evidence that we might start with to present to someone who is kind of still skeptical about this whole idea as to this just being an act of terrorism and it is what it is and we should let it go?
Well, you have two towers that have been destroyed primarily due to fire and not the jet fuel. The jet fuel burned up 90% of it, according to Nist, outside the building. The remaining 10% was gone in just 10 minutes, according to Nist. We're talking about normal office fires, again, bringing 210-story skyscrapers down to the ground in 12 seconds each. Free fall acceleration, nearly so. The building did not decelerate as it was falling through the 90,000 tons of structural steel below. No deceleration. It accelerated. It went faster and faster and faster every second, and completely shattering the structure, both of them. Their individual elements separated one from another, pulverizing 90,000 tons of concrete into an ash, really a powder, in just 12 seconds. Not down at the bottom, but in midair. So what can pulverize 90,000 tons of concrete in midair? We're talking, again, high energy explosives. What did that concrete powder spread like a river from river to river across lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area? What did it have in it? We talked about that. The previously molten iron microspheres and the evidence of nanothermite chips. Why wasn't there a stack of pancakes of 110 stories at the bottom of either of these towers? Well, that concrete and all of the steel trusses as well were pulverized, the steel trusses also, to a fine powder. So we have the evidence here of high energy explosives and nanothermite and thermite being used. And that should bother, as you suggest, anyone enough to want to learn more about this. So all of this evidence, by the way, is in our documentary 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. The 1-hour version is free on YouTube. Just look at it, search on YouTube, Experts Speak Out. You'll also find there other evidence, such as the seismic evidence, which shows that there are explosions going off even before the planes hit. And there's witnesses of that as well. And we have explosions going off in the lobby and down in the basement and throughout the building itself, documented by the first responders, 156 of them now on record orally talking about sounds of explosions, seeing flashes of light. And this is before, most of them immediately before the the towers collapse. So a lot of people say, "Oh my God, those noises must have been floors hitting one another." No, most of them are witnessing, these professional witnesses, the explosions either down under their feet, like a train running under my feet, they said, many of them, or up above like a belt, all these explosions. And then you saw the building coming down. This is extraordinary evidence that should really bother a lot of people.
Well, and that sounds like the exact opposite of what you would expect, because normally if there's an explosion, you see it first and then you hear it, because it's going to take time for the sound to travel. I mean, down the street, you can tell the difference when somebody drives by with a loud radio. There's going to be a delay before you ever hear anything. So that's interesting, but makes a lot of sense. Now, I've had one kind of wild question, I think, and this is, when we talk about, and I'm probably jumping ahead here just a bit, but when we talk about the investigation that NIST has done, and the one that you are interested in seeing happen, and friends, I'm going to try to get to some of the chat questions as soon as possible. We just got so much stuff to talk about here. But one that comes to mind for me, Richard, is that when we've traditionally seen buildings being intentionally destroyed, imploded, we see them in Las Vegas all the time. They build a new casino and they blow up a building and everybody gets to watch that. And I assume that they do that by blowing out the structural supports at the base of the building. Is that correct? Hello? Uh-oh, did we freeze? Well, I think we have one of us. Let's see. I'm going to type in a test message because I am seeing myself talk, but it looks like Richard might have frozen on his end. Let's see. Are you guys still hearing me? Because I've got a frozen camera from Richard at the moment. If so, just pop something there in the chat. This does happen occasionally with YouTube, especially now. Yes, so I don't know if we can blame net neutrality, but it looks like Richard lost his connection at the moment. So we'll stand by here and hopefully he'll come back. And I'm going to give you the question. Yeah, I think he dropped out. So he should be reconnecting shortly. My question is that, how do we really put this? There we go. I think he's back. Hey, just in time. Perfect, because I was about to kind of phrase a question that I wanted to put to you, Richard. And that is about the demolition of buildings. I'm going to assume that normally they take place when explosives are placed at the base of a building. Is that correct? If you wanted to intentionally demolish a building, you would blow it up from the bottom, right?
Typically, yes. Okay,
so I guess what I'm wondering, and I'm trying to be as logical as I possibly can here, when we look at something like the Twin Towers, where the explosions, actually, we know that planes hit the building, or, we assume that planes hit the building and there was a fire going on at a higher level. Doesn't that make it more difficult to really kind of make it, if we wanted to test this theory and say that, hey, this doesn't make sense for the structure at the top of a building to fail in a way that causes the entire building to come down in that pancake kind of fashion at free fall speeds. Is it difficult or just impossible to try to reproduce those conditions to put that theory to the test?
I think what you're saying is, if a collapse started at the point of jet plane impacts, as Nist claims it did, and as Zdenek Basant from Chicago Northwestern University tried to prove in a fraudulent paper that he produced just 2 days after 9/11, then could you have the upper section above the point of jet plane impacts in a dynamic load cause a progressive collapse all the way down to the ground nearly symmetrically, and then the top part destroy itself, as they claim? The answer is no. You have 80,000 tons of steel underneath the point of jet plane impacts in the case of the North Tower. So it would decelerate, it would stop, it might fall over then at that point.
Okay, that totally makes sense. And thus I have a better understanding of what people are talking about when they're skeptical about the free fall speed. You're talking about all that stuff the building's going to run into on the way down, and that it's almost like a cushion, right? I mean, it should slow things down.
Well, it's not a cushion. It's a very hard stop. It's 90,000 tons of steel that's designed 5 times stronger than it needs to be to keep anything from crushing it. So it can't happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, folks, I'm going to try to rush through the questions towards the end as quickly as we can. Dave Hammerton had one earlier, and I'm not sure really this is going to be a question for Richard to field because he is an architect, so that's his area of expertise. But he had asked, how come it was all cleared up with no forensics? We won't mention how Building 7 free falled. And we sort of talked about that, and I think we'll come back to that, guys, towards the end. But a legitimate question for sure. Now, you had some problems with the NIST reports or Nist because of, I assume, the way that the investigations were conducted. Are there just lots of holes in that? What are we looking to disprove or to question when it comes to their information?
Regarding Building 7?
Yeah, well, or in general.
In general,
lots.
Their building reports are fraudulent from beginning to end. Not only do they misrepresent what happened, they ignore the evidence that we've been talking about today, and that's included in our documentary 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, which is why the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry has submitted a petition with 57 exhibits of our evidence in it to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan. Now, the exciting news that came up a month ago is that the U.S. Attorney has agreed to impanel a grand jury, a special grand jury, to look at this evidence. And that's in writing. And that's why we have been on the radio with the Lawyers Committee everywhere we can to tell people about it and to raise funds for the attorneys who now have to put all kinds of effort together in order to keep the U.S. Attorney honest and keep additional information such as persons of material interest, because the jury is interested in indicting people. That's what they do, the grand jury. So very exciting development in the 9/11 truth movement here.
Yeah, and that's great. And I would say, to anyone, this is my mindset. Whether you believe that there is some good evidence for this case or not, I think that most of us will agree that we do need to keep people honest. So not conducting these kind of investigations and not asking these kind of questions and just assuming that whatever you're told is the truth, that can cause a lot of problems. So I'm happy to see that there are people out there who are pushing for answers and who are really wanting to say, I know how buildings work and they don't work like this, and explosions don't work that way. And again, at the very least, if we question it, we can hope that in the future, it's less likely that this type of thing happens if the people who might perpetrate this type of, this type of activity know that there's going to be a thorough investigation afterwards, and not one of these things that is done in 2 days and then it's swept under the rug and everybody forgets about it. So I'm happy that we have people out there like you, Richard, who are asking these kind of questions. I'm glad it doesn't fall on me. Certainly wouldn't be qualified, but definitely enjoy this. And by the way, folks, when I looked up Richard earlier today, I had not even realized this, but we have an IMDb entry for you. And it says, Richard Gage is a producer and writer known for 9/11, Blueprint for Truth, the architecture of destruction, 9/11 explosive evidence experts speak out, and 9/11 explosive evidence experts speak out, meet the experts. That's hard to say, but you've got a few different things under your belt at this point. Good to see.
Yeah, it's been exciting.
It is. So if we can, we've got a few minutes left here, and I'd like to go through the chat and see if maybe there are some relevant questions that you can answer while you're here. I am certainly intrigued, if not entertained, by a lot of this these types of topics when it comes to conspiracies. So we'll come back and talk about this later. But while we have you here, I'm hoping there might be something that you might be able to help us answer. So I want to look through the chat here. And Johnny Chang's already got good questions for us. Where was it? If everyone uses question marks. Okay, wasn't Tower 7 damaged by stray debris from the other falling towers?
Yes, there was some damage, and Nist considered this damage from the North Tower when it collapsed insignificant in terms of the cause of the collapse.
Okay,
of Building 7.
Fair enough. Okay, so this is what we want to know, and a legitimate question, obviously. But if it's not going to bring the building down, then not really relevant to the other side of the argument. Dave said, ask Richard to explain how this could happen. Well, that is going to be a real open-ended question, Dave. But and we're really here more to discuss Richard's area of expertise, which is architecture and buildings. But if there's anything you want to add, obviously, Richard, at this point, regarding the whole idea behind the motivation and the parties responsible for this, I am absolutely open to hearing your opinion on those as well.
Yeah, well, everybody should know that there was an elevator modernization going on the 9 months prior to 9/11 in the Twin Towers. And this comes up because people want to know, well, how could you set the charges in there? Well, in this case, the elevators were locked in turn, and for 9 months you had security at the elevators, and there's witnesses of this. And also, this would give an undercover operation the access to the core columns and beams, which are all immediately adjacent to the elevators. So a great undercover operation. In fact, Ace Elevator, who came out of nowhere to secure this contract, because Otis Elevator was a much bigger, more well-known company who had the maintenance contract for these elevators. So Ace had 85 employees in the building at the time the planes hit them, and they fled. They didn't stick around and help the first responders rescue the victims, because these are the experts, who can do just that. The elevator cabs are the rescue vehicle.
Yeah. Right. And that was, again, I try to listen to both sides of every issue. And that was one of the things that was brought up, was that, if these charges were set in place to demolish the building, that's not something that happens in a matter of hours. Obviously, they would have had to have time, access to the building, and some way to sort of conceal what they were up to while they were doing it. So if there's an elevator renovation going on at that point in time, that makes certainly a plausible explanation as to how that could have happened. Wayne had asked, and I think this is probably an easy one to answer, do we know what started the fire in Building 7? Was it something that came from the Twin Towers, or why did Building 7 catch fire?
That's what's assumed. I think Nist tries to avoid the question. I don't know why. Many suspect arson because the 12th floor and 13th floor, where the worst fires were, was the home of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which lost hundreds of thousands of files related to dozens and dozens of very, very high-profile cases like Enron and WorldCom, which were being investigated. So they claim that the records for those were lost and that they couldn't continue those criminal investigations.
Wow, and that's interesting, because the fact that we live in I would say any time after, I don't know, 1995, year 2000, you think that official important documents should be stored in more than one location. There shouldn't be, like we're living in the early 1900s, where if the bank catches fire and financial records are destroyed, that's it. There's nothing else. You think that those things would have been duplicated elsewhere. And the fact that they weren't certainly raises some suspicions. Nick Calitri, I believe if I'm reading this correctly, is asking, Richard, using your expertise, is there any explanation that would explain the possibility that the collapse was due to the plane crash and fire? I think that's a pretty straightforward yes or no one right there.
There's no possibility that the plane crashes caused the collapse, nor was there a possibility that the fires caused the collapse. They were diminished at the time of the collapse, in fact, in the Twin Towers, and of course, completely gone to the other side of the building in the case of Building 7 on the 12th floor. These are just stories used to deflect the truth. This is a magic illusion. We don't have, we've been tricked. Our eye is directed to the fires, the jet planes, the massive explosions, anything but what's really going on. The explosions of the planes, but all these other explosions are going on, which are not discussed, not picked up, and this whole set of evidence is censored by the mainstream media.
Right. Now, I know the answer to this one, but I'm not sure. Wayne had asked, who has access to thermite? And I'm going to guess that's probably just about anyone, right? Is it hard to come by thermite?
Well, thermite is an incendiary that has been around for 100 or more years, maybe 200. They use it to weld railroad tracks together. So it destroys steel. It works by means of heat, incredible heat, 4,000 degree temperatures, and that explains the incredible heat required to melt these steel beams and produce all this molten iron.
Okay, so if I wanted to acquire thermite, would I have a difficult time coming by that material?
Oh, you could order it on eBay.
Oh, okay. So so it's not like it would take any special access along those lines to get a hold of something like that, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, it is scary. But the nanothermite's another story. It's a very high-tech material.
Oh, okay.
Found, as we discussed earlier, it's made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. This is extremely sophisticated stuff. So we know where to send the grand jury when they convene.
Okay, so I hadn't realized that. We're talking about a slightly different type of substance. Now, there was another one out here, and if you don't have an opinion, that's fine, but someone had asked you, who do you think is responsible, if not a terrorist attack from outside of the U.S.? Or would you prefer not to answer that one?
Well, I'm an architect, first of all. I know we know that we have 3,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation, and the investigation by criminal investigators are qualified to follow those leads wherever they take them. And it's clearly some sort of an inside operation. I mean, we're not naive over here. We're not playing dumb. We know that there are elements highly placed in the U.S. government that have been involved in this, and this special grand jury hopefully will get to each and every one of them when they convene.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Now, there was one thing here that I saw that actually stuck out in my mind. I did want to bring back to you.
While you're reviewing that, let me just add, there's a couple of great books on this subject. One of them is by Kevin Ryan called Another 19 Suspects. In other words, set aside these Muslim hijackers. They're probably innocent. They probably weren't even on the planes. Look at these particular individuals, of course, which include Larry Silverstein and many other obviously highly placed, influential, dual citizen type individuals.
Well, I would certainly say that, like most things, if you want a real answer, oftentimes the correct course of action is to follow the money. So if there is someone who stands to benefit by some tragic event happening, it might be somebody worth looking at, right?
Yeah, like those who benefit in the arms industry from going to war, invading 2 countries, killing 2 million people, and all of the infrastructure that goes into supporting those illegal wars. Also, who benefits by taking away our civil liberties, because that's what happened after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, which was voted into effect without most or probably any politicians ever even reading it. And it was ready to go as soon as 9/11 happened. So, yeah, there's a real set of problems here. We've also engaged in a $6.5 trillion global war on terror since 9/11. And it all goes back to 9/11. So if there's any question about these Trade Center towers, then we've got to get to the source of what really happened there.
Yeah, that is another one where we could definitely go down a rabbit hole here. But the fact that you name a piece of legislation something like the Patriot Act uh, historically ensures that no congressperson would dare to, whatever it contains, no person who's voting for a bill called the Patriot Act wants to go down in history as the one person who voted against it. We know that, whatever it's called, if you don't do it, you're not American. Well, you got to sign off on it. No matter what's inside of it. It's a crazy process we have that takes place there. But yes, regarding civil liberties, we know a lot has changed. A lot of powers have been expanded under this. And again, I don't want to go too far off topic there. We're already gonna go a few minutes over time here. But I did want to wrap up with a couple points here that I think people would be interested in hearing. One of them is the what recent breakthroughs have you had when it comes to furthering your efforts in this investigation?
Well, the two big breakthroughs are that we now have these 3-year, $300,000 finite element analysis done from the University of Alaska in our hands, and we're undergoing internal reviews. It already pulls the rug out from underneath the Nist report, proving that their initiation of collapse theory is bogus. And then, of course, we have the U.S. attorney promising a special grand jury investigation of the 57 exhibits submitted to them by the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which contain the exhibits of the evidence that we've been talking about today. So we are off and running for a great 2019. We'll be doing a tour around the United States with this information.
Excellent. So I am going to have to get off here shortly, Richard, but I did want to leave everyone with some information that hopefully they will find helpful. Folks, if I don't already have the links to this down in the video description, I will add them after the stream ends. But Richard, beyond visiting the websites that you are involved with, what should people who are curious or want more information about this, where would you direct them? What should they do?
Well, we have a website. It's AE911truth.org. On that website, we have lots of evidence. We also have an opportunity to donate to the organization, particularly to the project, the joint project with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, so we can fund these lawyers on our side to make sure that the U.S. attorney does his job. And then, of course, at the Lawyers Committee, it's LC for 911.org. And LC for 911.org is where you can donate also for the Lawyers Committee in this joint project. Really important stuff. And the evidence is also available in a 50-page booklet called Beyond Misinformation. I highly recommend that to everybody at beyondmisinformation.org.
Excellent. So I will be going back again, folks, to the video description and adding any of the links that aren't already there that Richard has mentioned. Also, we have one more question here from Dave Hammerton, and he says, "How would America?" I'm not sure if this is directed at you, actually. How would America deal with the fact if it was done by our own government? Yeah, I think that's probably a very philosophical type of question there. Will visiting your website put us on the government watch list?
Probably.
Probably so, Harvey.
We have 3,000 courageous architects and engineers who have publicly demanded a new investigation. None of them are assassinated yet, and they haven't been called or threatened. So that's all good news.
Yeah.
You can move forward more easily with that.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd say, even though I'm laughing about it, Harvey, probably so. You'll probably be on some sort of list. But you know what they say? If you have enough people on any particular list, then that list doesn't really mean a whole lot anymore. I will predict, however, that if you visit Richard's website, you will probably start getting things in your Facebook feed, in your Google search results that are related to this topic, because that is how the internet works now. Wherever you go, you're going to be bombarded with more information that is related to whatever it is that you're querying or visiting. Other than that, Richard, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you having you here, and I would also predict that in the future, hopefully sometime we can do a 9/11 part 2 when we have some new information to share with everyone, if you're willing.
You bet. Happy to come back, Mike. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, Richard, if you will stay on the line for just a second, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. For everyone who's watching, again, thank you so much for joining us today. We will be back in the near future with some live streaming. In the meantime, check out Richard Gage, AIA. You can find his links in the video description, and I think you will be intrigued by a lot of the information on his website. Everyone, have a great week, and I will catch you next time.